Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Senator Barbara L'Italian, and I am the Senate Chair of the Committee on Consumer Protection and Professional Licensure. Welcome. The bill that we're going to talk about today sends a message that Massachusetts is serious about protecting consumers and their financial security. Over the past few weeks, as we've heard about the Equifax security breach, it's become clear that we need to do everything within our power here in Massachusetts to protect our everyday citizens and consumers. The details of the breach has impacted so many people with their personal information, and again, it's a big, big concern. Luckily, this issue isn't a new issue. Myself and Representative Jennifer Benson, who is the House co-chair on this bill, who happens to not be feeling well today, otherwise she'd be with us, filed a bill working in concert with AARP and with MassPER to look at this issue back in January. And in fact, this will be heard tomorrow at the Consumer Protection hearing. What we looked to do was to protect consumers by allowing them to freeze and unfreeze their credit for free instead of being forced to pay a fee every single time they choose to do so. We realized that this would be the perfect vehicle to work in concert with a lot of the work that Attorney General Maura Healey is working on right now to address this Equifax issue. I want to draw your attention to two sections from the bill, sections 4 and 5, that were the themes of our originally filed legislation. Section 5 allows for free security freezes, lifts, and freeze removals for all consumers. So in other words, consumers can request a freeze with one agency and have it extended to all other reporting agencies, so there is no need for multiple requests. Section 4 enables an individual whose secure information has been breached to obtain 3 additional copies of his or her credit report at any time. They should be able to obtain a report post-breach and pre-theft to protect themselves. There is no time limit on the requests to ensure that the data thief cannot simply wait for a time limit to elapse to then proceed to steal data information. The consumer can make all requests right away, or they can save them to use at their discretion in upcoming months or even years. Additionally, if a credit reporting agency, such as Equifax, is the breached entity, a consumer is entitled to 5 years of free credit reporting, and this is modeled off the California law that allows for the same. Both of these sections also contain a provision ensuring that a company cannot require a consumer to waive his or her right to a private right of action in exchange for obtaining additional reports. A consumer should not have to choose between protecting themselves, their personal information, and being able to take action to recover damages from a security breach. Finally, this bill has an emergency preamble, which means that upon passage, this would take effect immediately, and we've placed that into the bill to reflect the urgency that we need to be protecting our consumers in Massachusetts as soon as humanly possible. I will now pass off the microphone to our Attorney General, Maura Healey.
Terrific. Thank you so much, Senator L'Italian, for your remarks and for your leadership here. We greatly appreciate your Senate sponsorship of this legislation as co-chair of the Consumer Protection and Professional Licensure Committee. We also appreciate, of course, the work of your colleague, Representative Jen Benson, the House sponsor of this legislation. I'm delighted to be joined today here with MassPER, longtime leader on issues of consumer advocacy. With us today, Deirdre Cummings from MassPER, as well as Jessica Constantino, Advocacy Director for AARP Massachusetts, who also have led in this area of protecting consumers. As we gather today, 140 million Americans, 3 million residents here in Massachusetts alone, have been affected by this breach. Many are still reeling from the announcement from Equifax that their most sensitive personal information is out there and at risk. For the past decade, the Attorney General's office here in Massachusetts has investigated many data breaches. This is as bad as we've ever seen. Here's what we know. For far too long, these credit reporting agencies have played fast and loose with our data. We never gave our consent, but they were out there collecting our social security numbers, dates of birth, addresses, credit card information, even our driver's licenses. Equifax collected hundreds of millions of pieces of personal information, put them in a digital warehouse so that they could then sell them on to banks and credit card companies. Then they left the back door of that warehouse open. Criminals walked in, as we now know, stole that data. But what's particularly aggravating is that Equifax, who put our data at risk and failed to implement the necessary safeguards to protect that data, then turned around and tried to charge us for their mistakes. They said consumers couldn't sue if they accepted any assistance. They tried to charge consumers for credit freezes. Think about that. They tried to charge people who went to Equifax to protect themselves against the harm that Equifax caused. And worst of all, we've now learned through our investigation that Equifax could have stopped this breach from the beginning. The cause of this breach, a program, a software programming vulnerability, was posted on government websites for months. It was absolutely preventable, and Equifax didn't fix the problem. It's completely outrageous. It's why I sued Equifax last week to hold them accountable and to take steps to protect millions of our residents here across Massachusetts. Our position is clear. First, Equifax needs to pay for its mistakes. Equifax, not consumers, not people, should pay for credit freezes. And they should also pay for any damages that people may suffer as a result of identity theft or financial fraud. Second, Equifax has to pay a major penalty for this conduct and its mistakes. This should be a lesson to every financial institution out there with access to sensitive personal data. If you can't keep it safe, you can't have it. And finally, Equifax needs to fix this problem immediately so that it never happens again. But that is not enough, because this isn't just about one hack, one breach at a company. This really is about changing the culture around consumer information. Fundamentally, it's our data. We should own it. For too long, protecting consumers has been an afterthought in this multi-billion-dollar industry. So today, I am proud to stand here and announce that we have worked together to draft an updated law that will better protect residents and consumers in Massachusetts now and in the future. I want to thank my staff and the legislative staff for their quick work over the past week to get this done. Here's what the bill will do. First of all, you should be able to request a credit freeze anytime you want. You should be able to have a credit freeze or lift a credit freeze anytime you want and not be charged. Credit freezes anytime you want for free. This bill will make that the law. It's also absurd, as some of us have learned over the last week, that you have to try 3 different locations in order to impose a credit freeze. You simply shouldn't have to call 3 different companies to do this. This bill will change that by requiring those credit reporting agencies to put in place a simple one-stop shop for freezing or unfreezing your credit reports. Second, we're going to help people protect themselves. Now, under federal law, consumers are entitled to 1 free credit report a year from each of these agencies. But that is not enough to monitor your credit when your information, your data, has been compromised. So under this bill, if your data is stolen, Massachusetts consumers will get the extra access that they need to protect themselves from identity theft. And if, as with Equifax, the breach occurred at a ratings agency, we're imposing a special requirement. You'll get 5 years of free credit monitoring. 5 years free credit monitoring. Third, we're going to change the way our data security laws work to close that back door to the warehouse by requiring that credit reports be encrypted. No more playing fast and loose with our data, with our most sensitive information. No more leaving it exposed to the hackers and criminals who are out there looking to get a hold of it. And finally, through this legislation, we're taking on one of the most problematic aspects with those credit reporting agencies, the sharing of our information without our consent. And that's the way this has worked, folks, for years now. These companies are out there collecting, amassing all sorts of information, and then selling that information on to other companies who can then turn around and market to us. All of this is being done without our consent. From now on, if companies want access to your credit report or your credit score, they're going to need to get your permission first. If it sounds like this should have been the law all along, you're right, it should have been the law all along. The truth is, this system desperately needs reforms. They needed reforms even before this latest hack breach came to light. But right now, this is a major step that we can and must take to protect Massachusetts residents. I'm hopeful that this amended bill will earn the support of the committee after tomorrow's hearing, and I'm confident that Massachusetts can lead the way for the rest of the country by making the changes that we need. At this time, I ask Deidre Cummings of MassPerg to come forward.
Thank you. I forgot my large font notes. You know, in our everyday lives, whether you're looking to rent a home, buy a car, take out a student loan, or apply for a mortgage, and in some cases, if you're even seeking a job, a credit report is required. It's woven into the fabric of our very being. For each of these incredibly important transactions, our credit report can decide our fate. Because of this, our credit reports are supposedly kept secure by these three credit bureaus, Equifax, TransUnion, and Experian, whose entire purpose is to keep this information on our credit report safe. These massive security breaches at credit bureaus illustrates that not only did they throw away the lock and they lost the key, but when we asked them, we want to secure our information with a credit freeze, they charge us and make a profit off of their extreme negligence. Talk about adding insult to injury. We should not tolerate this. Massachusetts should be the 5th state to pass a strong, free credit freeze and thaw bill. And the leadership that we have in the Attorney General's office, in the Senate, and in the House, particularly Senator Italian and Representative Benson, are really going to put Massachusetts consumers first and protect every one of us from this extreme negligence. Thank you.
Thanks, Deirdre. Now Jessica Constantino for Massachusetts AARP.
Thank you very much, and thanks to our sponsors, Senator Italian and Representative Benson, and of course for the leadership of the Attorney General. AARP knows that the biggest target for identity theft are people aged 50 to 59, and with millions of members across the country, more than 800,000 here in Massachusetts, we know that that is an opportunity for people to target them and get their identity stolen. In addition, we know that our members are really concerned about this. This is an enormous issue for them. Allowing people to freeze and unfreeze their credit without a cost puts the consumer back in charge. And this is what we're hoping this bill will do. You've heard many features of this bill, the important components of it. One piece that was not mentioned but is worth saying is that this credit freeze would not harm your credit score. And so as you're thinking about other pieces of consumer protections in this bill, this is another piece that will really empower consumers. And so for all of the work that people have done within the legislative body, for the leadership here, we appreciate it and we hope that this moves forward fast. Thank you.
Thank you. I think at this time we'd be happy to take any questions.
Can you explain just for kind of your average reader, what can someone do or not do if they've imposed a credit freeze? What does that mean practically for your accounts?
Well, it means that somebody's not going to be allowed to open up a line of credit in your name if there's a freeze on your account. But what is important here, Shira, is that for far too long, we haven't had control over this. And in fact, for any of us who've gone on the websites recently to try to get credit freezes over the last week, what you came to learn is that they'll be charging you in some instances for those credit frees. What this legislation does is change that. No charge to impose or to lift a credit freeze. Credit freezes are a way to protect against potential identity theft or financial fraud because they prevent another entity from opening up further lines of credit in your name. That's why it's something that should be an option for people now. We encourage it. Now, if you're in the midst of refinancing your mortgage or taking out a loan for a car or for school, you want to think that through because obviously you want to make sure that you don't do anything that's going to block you from having access to the credit you need. But the whole point of this is to make sure that you are the ones in control, right? This is your data, this is your information. And for too long, it's been these companies that have been in control of our information. This changes that because what it says is, it affirms this principle that this is our data. If you can't take care of it, then you can't collect it and keep it. That's why we're proposing encryption, which is what we need to do to better safeguard our data. And these companies, sophisticated financial institutions, should be able to figure that out and put that in place. The other thing that it's going to do is to make sure that if there is a breach, we have entitlement to protection. We want to be able to see if somebody's looking to commit some sort of financial fraud or take our information and misuse that. That's why we need 5 years of free credit monitoring. And finally, I think what's really important, and it goes to sort of the underlying structure of this entire system, we should have control over our data. If others want to access that data, then we should be able to say whether or not we give consent to that. If they want to use it, if they want to purchase it, if they want to have a look at it, then we should be able we have to be able to give consent to that use. And that, I think, is fundamentally important and something that this legislation is going to address.
This 5-year period, does this apply only to future breaches, or would this also apply to the breach that happened that brought this up?
Well, I'll tell you what, obviously with respect to the Equifax breach, we are pursuing our remedies in court, and top of my mind is to make sure that every single consumer in this state is made whole. That Equifax is going to pay the cost for all credit monitoring and steps needed to prevent against identity theft. And if a consumer is harmed, now or in the future, it will be Equifax and not consumers that pay. So what this legislation will do, though, is separate from the work that we're doing in the courts to secure relief, gain accountability, maybe reform the system, or at least Equifax's practices. We're going to make sure that going forward, that this be the law here in Massachusetts. Should this pass, and I sure hope it does, because I know, having listened to and heard from so many people across Massachusetts that are absolutely and understandably outraged and frustrated, this is a law that will lead the country, and I think it makes sense. I hope to see that others would adopt similar legislation that accomplishes what this law will accomplish for consumers and residents here in our state.
Do you recommend
Can I just give another answer to that as well? Because, that's why I talked about doing an emergency preamble, right? So as soon as this is passed, it takes effect. So that's why there's an urgency here to have this happen as soon as possible so that people can set out to take control of their credit scores and all of that. So the intention is to address this as quickly as we, immediately upon passage.
This would affect all credit rating agencies, just the big 3, or?
All credit rating agencies. And remember, there are important laws that are here in place already that are there to ensure that companies, all kinds of companies, doesn't matter what kind of company it is, take steps to protect data, right? Important laws that the Attorney General's office enforces. But here we have particular legislation that goes beyond that and is aimed specifically at some of these credit reporting agencies that are amassing and collecting the huge volumes of information and personal data every single day. That's why they have a heightened level of responsibility and accountability, frankly. And that's why I think it's necessary to build in these particular protections here through this legislation.
Senator Italian, just follow to your question, to your comment. So if this were to pass immediately, as you said, it could potentially help those who are currently facing.
That's the intention.
All right.
That's the intention, absolutely. I think when we first were talking about this in January, when we filed it in concert with lovely folks up here from their agencies, we were looking at on the heels of the Target breach and many other breaches, right? Now this is really the mother of all breaches, right? Because this is the reporting agency that really should have been the keeper of the vault. This information should have absolutely been paid attention to. There should never have been an opportunity by not updating a piece of software for this to happen. And so there's an urgency now because so many people are affected by this. And so that's why theoretically we did it, I think, in response to the Target breaches and others, but this is just on another scale unto itself. And so that's the urgency in trying to get this passed and, you know, again, not having to wait. I mean, if you read the fine print, you know, there would need to be a period of time where consumer protection would write regulations, okay, up to, you know, they'd have a year to do that. But the intention is, with an emergency preamble, that this would take effect upon its passage.
Attorney General, do you recommend that consumers who are unsure if they're affected, who might have been affected by the Equifax breach, do you recommend that they provide their social security number and enroll in that program, or does that create a new set of security concerns given the initial
Well,
breach?
you know, to be honest, as somebody who has been on with all three credit reporting agencies over the last week, finding myself frustrated with the difficulty in navigating various websites, I think that my recommendation to people is as follows. First of all, everybody's in a different position. As I say, if you're in the process of trying to refi or get a car loan or a student loan, you know, think it through, talk to somebody about whether that makes sense or not for you right now. But I think what is important is that people take the opportunity right now to check out their credit report. And you can do that. Remember, everybody right now under current law is entitled to one credit report a year from the three major credit reporting agencies. I think it's a good idea to look at that and to make sure you understand. Yes, it says I have credit cards at these companies that I opened up. I got a line of credit on this card back in January. Just make sure that you have looked at that and that it's accurate. Okay? And if it's not accurate, then you've got to get in touch and we'll take steps from there. But the first thing I think I would encourage people to do is have a look at your credit report. Again, you should be able to go online to these various credit reporting agencies and get a copy of your credit report. One thing that I want to see change, though, is that a company like Equifax is not charging right now for credit reports. And I think what's important going forward, and frankly this may take some work from Congress, I think that you should be able to access a credit report and a credit score whenever you want, for free, anytime. But in the meantime, make sure that you check your credit report so that your credit history really reflects your credit history. The other thing I encourage people to do is to seriously think about requesting a credit freeze right now. Because unfortunately, the criminals got into Equifax because they left the back door of that warehouse wide open, right? But that means that information is out there. And so just freezing it at Equifax isn't going to do it. You need to make sure that you cover your bases and go on to all three, TransUnion, Experian, and Equifax, and request credit freezes there in the interim. And I think that is a good course. Continue to look to our website. We're continuing to put out information for folks across Massachusetts on the steps that they can take. Continue to call my office, too, as you go through this process, because we are wanting to work real time with the company right now. As I say, we have sued them. We're going to continue to be in touch with them. And in the interim, while that litigation proceeds, I want to make sure that we are doing everything we can to help consumers here and to help consumers protect themselves against potential identity theft.
Any idea how much money these companies are collecting in these fees for freezes and fees for thawing?
Look, it's a big business. I mean, basically, this is a business that is predicated on this idea of monetizing our personal data and information. And they found a way to make a lot of money Equifax alone made over $3 billion last year. $3 billion, yet couldn't find a way to put a lock on the back door, right? So that needs to change. It's big business. Certainly the flow of credit and information related to credit is important to the workings of our financial system, but our financial system will fall apart unless and until we have a secure foundation and a system for the sharing of, the dissemination of that information. And as consumers, I think that it's important to remember it is our data. And if somebody wants to monetize it, we sure should have consent, and we should sure be able to be rest assured that that information is protected.
In your lawsuit, will you be seeking that kind of money that I as a consumer might pay to freeze?
Well,
among other
things, we've sought money back for consumers, whatever it takes to make them whole and protect them against identity theft or any damage that flows from this breach, a significant penalty, and the disgorgement of any profits made during this period where there was this total exposure and vulnerability out there that could have been prevented. That is also something that we're seeking.
Has your office received any reports of losses that can be directly linked to Equifax to date?
Not as of yet, but see, the problem with this area and the reason why this legislation is important when it comes to 5 years of free credit monitoring is because it takes time. You may not see somebody try to rip you off until 6 months, 18 months from now. So we don't know yet, but what I want to make sure of is that no matter when and if it happens, people are protected, and it's Equifax that's going to pay to foot that bill, not consumers here in Massachusetts.
And we don't put a limit on, a time limit on when you can do these freezes as well, which is critically important, because let's say we decide 1 year free credit freezes. We're telegraphing to those who have that data that a year and a day after, right, they can go out and do this. And by the way, I'm sure most of you are football fans, watched the games yesterday. There were commercials for commercial enterprises that make money. I think it might have been LifeLock advertising, because they get it. Like, this is a real problem that people really worry about. Our seniors worry about it. My 23-year-old daughter, who's bought her first car, paying back her college loan, young teacher, like, she's worried about it, right? She manages on a very thin margin. So we all worry about it. And now we have a company that is making a smart marketing decision to put their name out there to say, come buy from us to protect you, when we should never have had this breach in the first place. And given the enormity of the breach and who created the breach, we really have to provide that 5 years of credit protection.
Okay, thank you guys. Thanks everybody, and again I want to thank Senator Barbara L'Italian and Representative Ben Benson for their leadership. They were working on these issues long before there was this sizable breach by Equifax, and we're going to continue to work together and take all steps necessary to protect and advance the interests of consumers here in the state. Because at the end of the day, that's what this is about. It's about protecting people, protecting consumers, and doing things that I think just make common sense. In a lot of ways, people would have already thought this was the law to begin with. Unfortunately, we know it isn't the law, it hasn't been the law, and the system needs to be reformed and changed. So today's, I think, announcement is an important step towards that. Thank you.